If you're looking for information about the more remote parts of the Little Miami, we definitely have some clues and some recent intelligence for you, but let me say this if you're planning to go outside of routes established and maintained by the liveries. Good luck, and you'd better be ready. Obstruction, 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 obstruction. We'll intersperse the PowerPoint that I put together to sell this trip to my adventuring cohort. We'll show some video of what we found, give our advice, and try to get you a little more prepared for the Little Miami. There's not a lot of reliable intel out there on the less paddled sections of the Little Miami, and soon our intel might not be reliable either, so take this into account. Talk to anybody you can about the Little Miami in advance, read whatever's available, try to get recent information. This video was made in late 2022. Research had me wanting to put in north of Clifton Mills and start out floating an area called the Narrows in the Glen Helen Nature Reserve near Yellow Springs. Two things about that though. One, it turns out the Narrows is impassable in a canoe, and B, that park's highly restricted. You can go hike it for yourself and see it really is gorgeous, but it's just not passable in a canoe. It's too small, too narrow, the elevation changes, it just doesn't work. Our next put-in option was John Bryan Park. The park website states that Jacoby Road is their official put-in for paddling, and we thought we might paddle upstream a little bit from there to see where the Narrows actually starts to get too narrow, but that plan changed too when we were dropping our pickup vehicles at Morgan's Canoe Livery down in Fort Aitchen. At Morgan's, we were lucky enough to run into the owner, Randy, who we had asked permission to park overnight via email, but a conversation ensued about our plans, and we were rightly advised that there were too many blockages south of Jacoby and north of Bellbrook. He even mentioned one blockage that had its own name, El Horindo. It's reportedly a quarter-mile long with deep mud and stickers on both sides, nearly impassable without machinery. So we wisely heeded Randy's sage advice and identified a more southern put-in, moving our trip even further south at Bellbrook Canoe Livery. Bellbrook's a great livery with a great launch. We put in there at 11 a.m. Now, the Little Miami has a very slow flow rate to keep in mind. It averages less than 1/8 of a mile per hour. It almost doesn't move at all. So don't count on the river's flow to move your trip forward. It might as well not be moving at all. Once we were on the river in earnest, we nearly immediately started hitting obstructions, which required getting out of the boats and maneuvering them safely through with all our gear. Expedition canoeing is different than recreational canoeing. Personally, I found myself a lot more conservative about trying to shoot troublesome areas in the river due to our canoes being full of gear, plus other factors like temperature, which on our trip was 50 to start the day, climbed to about 60, but then it fell to 32 at night. So scuttling a canoe, that's not something you want to do with gear. And to do this type of trip, you do have to have some gear. It's not like cabrewing. This is not navigating remote parts of the rivers. It should not be thought of as cabrewing. Come to find out, between the Bellbrook and River's Edge liveries, both of which are great liveries by the way, and the links are below, there's quite a few obstructions. The river is so slow and so windy that we're worried we weren't going to make it to our campsite before dark, which was only 10 miles from where we put in, but we did manage to make it by 6 p.m. So from Bellbrook to River's Edge, with no more than 30 minutes of playtime to fish or lollygag around, it took us almost 7 hours, which was way longer than we anticipated. We camped overnight with permission and got on the water the next morning at 10 a.m. By the way, if you camp on the river and you hear what sounds like a squatch throwing huge rocks into the river all night, don't worry, it's just the beavers sliding down into the river, and there's plenty of log jams for them to work, so they're very prolific. Shortly after embarking the next morning, we ran into another jam, which we tried to cut our way through, rather than portaging all our equipment, but it didn't work and we had to portage anyway. And at that portage, our resident huntsman found and explained a beaver slide, which is news to me. I'd never seen one before. They're pretty, but don't eat these berries. Our only severe concern for day number 2 was Corwin Dam, which is near Waynesville. We calculated about 2 hours from the River's Edge livery, and as you move south from there, you want to start looking for the river to straighten out and get deeper and wider. It's noticeable if you pay attention, but you do have to pay attention. If you approach the spillway and you're not paying attention, it'd be pretty dangerous and easy to get pulled over by the current. It's a dangerous dam, so you need to keep to the banks on one side or the other and carefully plot what you're going to do. Stopped about 150 yards from the dam, scouted for possible portages, and we ended up opting to very carefully hug the easterly shoreline and move ourselves hand over hand to a less steep embankment for what turned out to be about a 100-yard portage. After Corwin Dam, you've got the Corwin Covered Bridge, which is a great marker to look out for the discharge channel from Caesars Creek Lake. If the lake is discharging, this can be a hazardous area. We were in drought conditions at the time, so it wasn't discharging. From the Caesars Creek discharge, we were supposed to get to Morgan's Livery in our takeout vehicle by 4 p.m. That was a gross miscalculation. With all the blockages, the shallow drags, and precarious strainers, we'd only made it to the Little River Bar and Grill. We had hopes to proceeding on to Devil's Staircase and then through the sweet geological formations around Fort Ancient, but again with the blockages, portages, and slow flow rate, I just severely miscalculated the trip. We begged a ride from a kind glass blower from Yellow Springs, got our truck, and took out right there at the restaurant, which ended our trip short of the destination, but just in the nick of time around 6:30 p.m. right before dark. Don't let it discourage you, but let it empower you to be ready, to know the hazards, plan accordingly, and maybe calculate your time a little bit better than we had. The Little Miami is navigable, but the more remote sections, they're going to have you working like a pioneer. Our cohort's fairly experienced and rough, but even we had our willpower and our tempers tested. After the trip, we'd strongly recommend waders, saws, and most importantly, willpower to forge forward. This kind of remote paddling is not for the unexperienced or faint of heart. There were several areas that could have been life and death situations had somebody tried to haphazardly shoot through or not stop in time, assess the blockage, and figure out the safest thing to do. There's a link to the complete slideshow that we put together when we were trying to plan this trip, as well as links to all the liveries and people who helped us along the way. Stay safe out there, get out into nature, and enjoy God's creation.